Hey guys, I'm the 50s kid. This is my E46 BMW. In this video, we're going to delete the CCV system and install an oil catch can. So let's get started. So real quick, let's go over all the stuff that you're going to need to buy. Here is the oil catch can. This is just the cheapest one on eBay. It's probably like $15. There's nothing special inside of it. It's just a can. The more expensive ones are going to have a baffle system in there. There's one problem with it that I found. These inlet ports on here, they don't actually have any gaskets between them and the cans. That's definitely going to leak. But I noticed that it comes with these gaskets, which have these little cutouts in there, and they're just the perfect size for sticking to the bottom of each one of these. It comes with 4 of them. You only need 2. You need these components from your existing CCV system. We're going to reuse these components. We're going to modify them. This is the end that hooks to the valve cover. Just cut down there. You don't have to press really hard at all. Just make a little slit that pops open. Boom. This is that complicated part that hooks to the oil separator. We're going to do the same thing there. We're going to make a little slit on the back. We're going to reuse this tube. This is going to be the source of our vacuum, and when this is hooked to the valve cover, the blow-by gases are going to come this way and go into the catch can. So to make that all work, we need some fittings in order to kind of bring everything together. This is 3/4. This is 5/8. What you want to do for this one, I got a length of, I think this is a foot. I'm not going to put it all the way on yet. I'm just kind of showing you how everything is going to fit together. The problem is the catch can takes 3/8 hose. So we need a 5/8 to 3/8 converter. And what you want to use is something like this. Found this in the hardware store. It's an adapter for PEX tubing. They call it a 3/4 by 1/2 inch coupling. It fits just perfectly. And then I've just got a length of 3/8 tubing here. I haven't cut it yet, but basically the 3/8 tubing is going to fit on the end of it there. And then this is going to run to the catch can. And for the other one, we need basically a length of 3/4 inch tubing. I just got about like 6 inches here. And then we're going to need this adapter. It's 47080. It's the 5/8 to 3/4 inch adapter. So that's going to go in there. And that adapts it down to 5/8. I have just like a little section of the 5/8 tube cut off. We have another one of those adapters. Adapts it down to the 3/8 tubing, same thing. That 3/8 tubing runs over to the oil catch can. But problem is, we need a PCV valve to go in that setup somewhere, right? So instead of using this adapter right here, I'm going to throw the PCV valve in its place. Now, unfortunately, all PCV valves, it's going to be like 3/8 on one end and then 1/2 inch on the other end, not 5/8. So I just wrapped it with a bunch of Teflon tape. So that's going to take the place of one of our adapters. A PCV valve is important. It's not only a check valve to prevent a backfire from backfeeding into the crankcase of your engine. It's also a vacuum regulating valve. That's important because if you develop any leaks in any of these components and you don't have a PCV valve, you're going to have such a large vacuum leak that your car is probably going to stall. One other thing you're going to need, 3/8 vacuum cap. It's the largest one in here. It's 47396 because we're going to need to cap off the inlet port on the oil dipstick tube. That's where the oil drains back to from the oil separator valve. Otherwise, you got a vacuum leak. Now, that's the way you could go. I'm going to take this one step further. See, the thing is, if you just left it there, then your oil catch can is going to be accumulating a bunch of oil. Every couple thousand miles, you're going to need to be pulling this thing out, taking the plug off, and draining it. I really don't want to do that. We have the ability to drain the oil back to the oil pan through that port on the oil dipstick tube. So what I'm going to do is pull this thing off, and I got this little barb connector thing, and I just put a little O-ring on it. So this thing, you know, threads in perfectly. And I'm just gonna run some 3/8 tubing. I'm gonna run that down to the oil dipstick tube. And I'm also going to run a check valve in there to prevent oil from getting sucked back up and only allowing it to drain one way down to the oil dipstick tube. So that's gonna be my whole setup. We're gonna go ahead and install it now. Remove the 3 plastic rivets and remove the air scoop. Remove the 2 10mm fasteners, loosen the band clamp, disconnect the MAF, and remove the air box. Remove this plastic cover and the microfilter housing cover and the microfilter. Remove the 4 number 30 Torx bolts and remove the microfilter housing. Remove the 2 cover plates on the top engine cover and remove the 2 10mm bolts front and back. Then lift out the engine cover. Remove the 2 plastic retainers here and here. Pull off this piece of trim. Remove the brake booster vacuum hose from the booster. Then remove the engine heat shield. Loosen the band clamp between the upper and lower intake boots. Use silicone spray on the F connector and carefully pry it out of the boot. Then remove the boot. Unplug the DISA valve and then unscrew the 2 T40 screws here and then here. Then remove the DISA valve. Remove the band clamp on the idle air control valve elbow. Make it extra loose so that you don't have any problems getting the elbow off. Swing it down to reveal the band clamp on the lower intake boot. Once you loosen the lower band clamp extra good, then you can remove the lower intake boot. But be aware that this is a very weak area and it'll tear out if your boot is very old. Remove the 13mm nut on the oil dipstick tube. Pull your fuel line out of the lower dipstick tube bracket. Mine's already broken off. There's also a hard line in another little bracket behind it. Pull that out of there. Right here is the return line from the CCV. Right here. You can see it here. You can see here where it goes into the oil dipstick tube. We're going to need to remove that. I'm going to try to pull the dipstick tube out so I can get better access to this line and better leverage with which to disconnect it. So now you can see that line better right here. So I'm going to go ahead and try to remove that. Hit it with silicone spray. I'll go ahead and pull the tube off. And remove your oil dipstick tube. Don't forget the O-ring that got left where the oil dipstick tube came out. And of course, don't forget to put that O-ring back on the dipstick tube right now. Otherwise, you will forget later. And of course, this would be the port that you need to cap off if you don't want to run a return line from your catch can. So now we're going to work on the top hoses here. We're going to try to disconnect this hose. And if yours are relatively new, you should be able to just pinch these with your fingers and pull them off, pull this tube off, just like that. If yours is really, really old, you're not going to have much luck with this. So you might get a screwdriver under there to help you out. Try as best you can. The plastic does get really hard with age. If that be the case, you might be better off buying a new set of these tubes off eBay for 40 or 50 bucks like I did. So now it's time to get that tube off of there. This is what that tube looks like closer up. You can see that it's these 2 lock tabs up here that are what's holding it into place. And what you need to do is squeeze these 2 side tabs in order to spread those lock tabs out. Again, if yours is really, really old, this plastic's too hard and no matter how much you squeeze them, it's just not gonna spread. So what I recommend you do in that case is just break this plastic ring off with a screwdriver as best you can. Once you kind of break it off, especially right here, try to stick a screwdriver in from behind and just get up in there and break that up and off, and you'll get it off. You don't really need this lock thing, honestly. This O-ring right here is enough to sort of keep this thing in, and it just, in my experience, it doesn't pop out. This is vacuum. It's sucking itself in, not pushing itself out. You've got good access from the back to come in with some needle nose pliers, grab those tangs, and push and pop it right off. See, mine popped off because it's new. And now it's nice and loose. See? This is also a good time to disconnect this tube. My ring is already broken off, so You need to get this tube out of here because we want to run our new tube down where it goes. And if you look down over here, you can see that the evap purge solenoid is in the way, but that should pull off of its rubber mount. So now you can see where that tube goes. You can see where it connects to the oil separator down there. It's really in a buried kind of a spot. It's hard to get with your hands. So what I recommend you do is just cut it right here with a tin snip, and that should leave you enough room to run the new line. Me, I'm going to pull this out of here with my hand because I want to reuse it. I was able to slip my hand down underneath there, like through here this way, not my right hand, but my left hand. So I was able to slip down there and kind of press on it, and I got it loose and free. So out it comes. Remember this tube here that we bent backward? Well, now that we have this tube out of here, I'm realizing as I look down through here that I can see the tube right there. And if you've seen in my CCV Explained video, you know that this is the hose that needs to be twisted downward in order to pull it out. So it looks like I can just go ahead and twist it down myself. So you can see like how far down I've twisted it, right? And I should probably be able to go ahead and pull that out. I'm going to leave it in place, but if you want to go ahead and get that tube out, that's how you do it. If you bought a new kit and these fittings are brand new in order to do this job, you're going to want to test fit this thing on a couple times in order to compress this O-ring. I recommend you give it a little spray of silicone spray. You could also use silicone paste. And then I'm going to work it on upside down a couple of times. Just kind of work it in where it's supposed to be, compress the O-ring down. So as an alternative method, instead of struggling to remove these pieces here from this piece, instead we're just going to remove this piece from the intake manifold and just keep the tubes and everything together with it, and we'll pull it all out together. So to do that, we're just going to cut this tube right here. This is a more destructive method. You can't actually go back once you do this. Come in here and cut this tube with the tin snips. Now this is obviously the tube that I bought new. This is the one that I already sliced at the beginning of the video, so that's already sort of, you know, loose. You see the slits actually on the back there. So that's obviously loose, but what you would do is just cut it right here so that you can just pull the whole thing out together. So we just need to remove 4 T25 screws. And then we can just sort of come in here with a pry bar and just pry up. There are 6 O-rings that these things are stuck in. So you just gotta give it a little pull like that. Come in under, lift each one, just like that. We'll undo this plug right here, and we can just sort of pull this out just like that. And obviously you'll have a little end on here that you snipped off. And so you would just be able to cut down right there, get it off, and there you go. You can just go ahead and put your tubing right on this and install it back in once we go. But I'm not going to do it like this. This is just an alternative method. It's probably going to be a lot easier for you to do it this way, but I'm going to go back to doing it the other way, the way I was doing it the first time. So I'm going to reinstall this and we'll do it that way. So I've done some test fitting and I believe I'm pretty happy with my lengths. I've cut them to what I want them to be. This is a 10-inch piece of 5/8. The PCV valve is here. This is a 14-inch piece of 3/8. So that's going to be the part that fits up in here. And I'll show you how that slides in a moment. So for this tube, this is going to be a 6-inch piece of 3/4, followed by the adapter, followed by a 2-inch piece of 5/8, followed by a 30-inch piece of 3/8, which is going to run down and around and connect up here to the oil catch can. So now I'm going to show you how those hoses are routed. Basically, this one just runs down through here. And will fit right there. You can see that I cut the PCV valve. I cut the 5/8 hose so it was just long enough to just come right with the edge of the intake manifold. This just seem to make the most sense to me. That way I can, you know, easily get at it if I ever need to change that PCV valve or clean it out or do anything like that. It's just right there, accessible for me. The hose is going to come up, it's going to run over top of the intake boots, and it's going to run to the oil catch can, which is going to be tucked right here. When I was doing my test fitting, for some reason, this fitting was really difficult to get on and stay on. So I think it's just the fact that this 5/8 inch tubing is a little thicker around than what was there before. So because of that, what I said before, I'm going to take back. Try not to break this off if you're going to reuse the old one, because I think without this intact, you're never going to get that thing to like snap all the way forward in place. It kind of just wants to pull itself off because of the thickness of that tubing. I'm going to recommend you buy a new kit just to make it easiest on yourself. There we go. I heard the snap. So I just want you to take note of the way I routed it. I just found it easiest to come off to the side of the evap solenoid. So for this tube, I found it best just to sort of go straight down almost. Grab it once it's down and far enough. You can just help feed it back, feed it down, and it just sort of fits nicely into place. I haven't sprayed silicone spray on that yet, so I'm not going to connect it yet, but as you can see, the hose just fits right up here very nicely. So I noticed just now that this tube wasn't like on all the way, so I tried to pull this off of here and I just ended up breaking this off. So yeah, it's kind of a thing with me. I always seem to break this particular fitting. So yeah. Now, if you're not running a drain from your oil catch can, you're going to need the 3/8 vacuum cap. Hit it with a little silicone spray and just fit your vacuum cap right over the oil dipstick tube like that, and then reinstall it. In my case, I'm running a drain line from my catch can, so I'm pulling this off of here and we'll cut that to length. So I've got my drain line on there. I got the check valve on there. You can see that the arrow is pointing down that way. That's the direction of flow. We want oil to flow that way, not come back this way. I've got my O-ring on there. I'm gonna go ahead and put this back in place. I can see the hole where it goes because I've got my light shining just right. That's important. Important for you, just as important for you as it is for me. I'm gonna reach back here and get that fuel line in front of it where it needs to be. So I've just reinstalled that bolt right there. I don't know what the torque is. Besides, you're not gonna be able to get a torque wrench in there anyway. Just make it tight. Reinstall the lower intake boot. Remember to tighten the lower clamp first and then tighten the upper one. If you do the upper one first, you won't be able to get to the lower one. Reinstall the Vanos. Tighten the two T40 screws here, and put the connector back on. Reinstall the heat shield. Remember to install the two plastic connectors here and here. Put this top piece of trim back on. Plug your brake booster vacuum line back in. You can spray that with silicone spray if it's being difficult to go back in. So go ahead and reinstall the upper intake boot. It's going to go about there. And this, if I didn't mention it before, is where the oil catch can is going to live. It just seems to fit really nicely right there. As you can see, I've got the drain line right here. I'm going to cut that to size right now. And you'll notice that these two lines will fit right up here very nicely. In fact, I'm wondering now if I want this line to come up and underneath here. So as you can see, I've gone ahead and cut my drain line. Just gonna install that. Go ahead and put the upper intake boot back on. Let's see, this would be my output line, which goes there. This would be the input line, which goes there. Again, the input line is the one that comes from the valve cover. Output line goes to the intake manifold. If I'm being honest, I probably cut this line just a little bit too short. So go ahead and give yourself a little more room. Just imagine you're following this big bundle of wire right here. You're just following it around. That should give you a pretty good idea of how to cut your lines. So I still got the airbox in there, no big deal. Remember to tighten up the band clamp on the mass airflow sensor and tighten up the two 10mm bolts. Reinstall the upper engine cover and tighten the two 10mm bolts. Reinstall the microfilter housing. Don't forget those four number 30 Torx. Put the microfilter back in, put the cover back in, and snap on this little wire cover. Finally, put the air scoop back in. And you are done. Let's fire this baby up and give it a test. Okay, moment of truth. Okay, so I think I figured out what happened. All that misfiring is caused by the fact that that O-ring didn't seat all the way in when I was pushing that tube in. You can see it kind of hanging down off the bottom right there. Okay, I managed to get it snapped back in. So let's give it another try. Ah, that sounds right. All right, so I finished all that up last night, and then as I was lying there in bed, I was thinking about things, and I realized I made a mistake. And as you guys know, I'm always big enough to admit my mistakes on this channel and keep them in these videos. The mistake was that I installed the PCV valve backwards. Basically, it's always being sucked shut where I installed it. So there it is. My mistake really wasn't too hard to kind of undo here. So there's that PCV valve. It just needs to be this way because this is the end that has the check valve in it. So what we need to do is get that line out of here. Thankfully that line is pretty easy to sort of pull out. I can just pull it out right here like that. And this is where the PCV needs to go. Okay, got that fitting off. I'm gonna need this clamp to transfer over. Clamp needs to go here. PCV goes here. Fish the line back through. Back down, around and through. Put this little connector here. So there we go. That wasn't too big a deal. I'll just put the airbox back on and start it up. So I went for a little shakedown cruise and it did not go well. I started to see smoke escaping from underneath the hood, pulled over, and I noticed that it was escaping from the valve cover. I think some oil was leaking from the valve cover, getting on the exhaust manifold and burning. And that was happening because this PCV valve is the wrong valve entirely for this application. It just doesn't have enough flow. So there was excessive pressure inside the crankcase that was escaping through the valve cover, getting on the exhaust manifold and burning. I did a little research and found out that this is the right valve. I got this from Napa. The part number is 29358. There are a couple other part numbers I found. I'll put them in the description. You should be able to locate this valve. I went ahead and installed it already, went for another shakedown cruise just to make sure it's all working correctly, and it is now. Why don't I take you and show you what I did and also a couple other refinements I made. Once this thing got up to operating temperature, these tubes became a lot more pliant and they were just a little too easy to pull off of here, so I threw some clamps on those. You'll also notice that I moved this tube over to this side of the intake boot rather than this side. When it's on this side, it wants to turn the oil catch can a little too much this way, and you can see that it kind of put a bend in this tube because it's pressing up against this wiring loom. So I just found that if I put it on this side, it keeps the oil catch can straighter, and this isn't interfering with anything, and it's just happier that way. So like I said, I've already got the new PCV valve installed in here. I should be able to like pull it out. So this is the valve. This is what it looks like. You saw the part number earlier. And this is the check valve end. This is the end that protects against the backfire. So this is the suck end. This end has to be going towards the intake manifold. This end has to be going towards the valve cover. So I've just got it back here in the tube that's running up to the intake manifold. And what I did was I cut off a little bit of the tube, just a little section. So we can just put the check valve in there, install it back here. So the PCV issues are now fixed. It doesn't smoke anymore. It runs good. Like I said, I did a test drive. However, there's still another problem. When I was doing that test drive, I had my scan tool plugged in and I was monitoring fuel trims, and I could see that there's a vacuum leak. It's a small one, but it's there. Let me show you. I'll plug in my scan tool. So as you can see, we've got some really high short-term fuel trims. When the engine speed increases, these short-term fuel trims go down, which is a classic vacuum leak. So there's something leaking somewhere on this system, and I can assure you I had no vacuum leaks before I started this whole project. So it is something with what we have just installed, and I believe I know what it is. Right here I can hear air escaping. So I'm going to pull this thing out and examine it. So I've got the original cap down here so that I just don't have to hold my finger over that port, and I can just hold my finger over this port. I've got my vacuum gauge hooked up to this, and as you can see, it does not hold vacuum at all. And since we just plugged up all these other ports here, the only two left were this thing right here. I figured out that this is just a thing where you pull it in and that just releases these tubes. And all that is are these little fingers in there. And if you just push this thing down, it spreads those fingers open so that the tube can come out. Because this rotates around freely, the air is getting in there. That's not a vacuum tight kind of thing. So we need to replace these fittings with something else. I tried to go to the hardware store and I tried to find barb fittings for these ports right here. My thought was to just run my own clear line between two barb fittings that were, and run Teflon tape around the thread so that it was airtight there. That would work and it would give you the whole oil level thing, but I couldn't find those at my particular hardware store, but I could find caps for these. So I think that's what I'm going to install, and since I'm running a drain line, it's not going to matter for me. I want to fix this because high fuel trims actually cause poor mileage, and they also make it difficult to diagnose future problems because it's a problem itself. I don't want this system to create any problems. So we need to solve this. Now, before you go ahead and say, that's what you deserve for buying a $15 catch can, I see this on every single catch can out there on the internet that I could find. There must be 5 or 6 different designs on eBay. Some look really fancy, billet aluminum, blah, blah, blah. They all use this leaky thing. It looks exactly the same. It has these same little blue lock things on it. I even see them in the more expensive ones. So just be aware, every catch can is going to have this problem. This sucks. So this is what I got. 1/8 inch male imperial pipe threads, I believe. Okay, so I went ahead and got the plugs in there. I used Teflon tape. They're nice and sealed up now. I've tested it. I can't hear any leaks from there. You can see that it holds vacuum now, but it's slowly decaying. And I can actually hear that it's coming out of here, out of the top of here, out of these fittings. I think it's coming from the bolt holes here. I'm realizing that, those threads aren't sealed, and then the bolt hole itself isn't sealed. So I've come up with these 2 O-rings. You can see that they're like a really nice fit for right there. I have this kit of O-rings that I got from Harbor Freight. See, I can already tell that I can build up more vacuum in this thing. So let's see how high I can go. And you can see that it's not decaying. So final thing, guys, I actually had this fitting on there with the O-ring and I did a pressure test and it's totally leaking. I decided to use Teflon tape instead, and I wrapped it with a lot of Teflon tape because the fit is actually kind of loose in here. And then I pressure tested it and that worked out fine, but I wasn't sure if Teflon tape would stand up to being in contact with oil over a long period of time, because, you know, this fitting does stick up in here a little bit. There's always going to be a little bit of oil just kind of coating the fittings there and the cap right here. So I just wasn't sure if that was a long-term thing, so I decided to use RTV instead. So I just put a little on there, and then I put it on these fittings as well, and I just let it dry overnight. And so now I've got this tube that it's just a little spare hose here that I'm connecting between these two fittings just so I don't have to cover them with my finger. And we'll just go ahead and do another pressure test. So as you can see, it's holding vacuum. Now we're going to put it on the car. So I just got back from another shakedown cruise. It ran great. It worked perfectly. And these are the fuel trims at idle. And quite honestly, these are perfectly acceptable. I mean, anything, you know, under 5% is totally fine. It's not perfect, but you know what? This system really wasn't engineered to be perfect, obviously. I mean, look at all the re-engineering we had to do. But honestly, this is really good. I mean, you don't see these until you're at a dead stop. When you're out driving around, the fuel trims are basically hovering around zero-ish. They're going negative at times. They're going a little bit positive at times. They're normal fuel trims. One final thing, somebody on the message boards brought up the fact that you might fail a smog inspection if they see that you have a catch can installed. And I thought that's a good point, particularly because I'm here in California. They're the most strict about that. So I came up with this. I just kind of pulled the catch can around and just kind of shoved it down in there. It's still upright, as you can see. There's the top of it right there. But it's, you know, it's upright and it'll still drain like that. And I can put the, you know, the air box back in just fine, plenty of room right there. And I can just, you know, do that before I go to the smog check place, and it'll be totally hidden. You'll never know that it's there. And then I can, you know, I can choose to put it back in place afterwards if I want to or not. It's really up to me. Or, you know what, I could even leave it installed down there permanently. I can just kind of, I can cut these lines shorter so that they're just kind of permanently right there, and it's not touching anything hot or anything. That's, you know, that's a good place for it if you want to keep it there permanently. So it's totally up to you. I kind of like it up here because I think it kind of looks cool. So I'm going to put it back there. But yeah, so if that's a concern of yours, don't be concerned. So I feel obligated to run with this system for at least a week, make sure there are no major problems with it. So then I'll just do a wrap up after that. So I've had this installed for about 2 weeks now, and it has been running flawlessly and it's all good. Let's talk about why you would want to do this in the first place. I initially was against installing oil catch cans on these cars. In the case of an oil catch can, because you're running a PCV valve, there's actually a really good benefit to that. Not only does the oil catch can replace the stock CCV system, which does have two flaws that cause the system to clog and or fail over time. By running this PCV valve, you're actually increasing the amount of vacuum that is being applied to the crankcase, and that will help your piston rings to seal better, particularly your oil control ring. If you're not aware, the M54 engine has a huge oil consumption problem. The M52 TU engine doesn't have it, so if you have a 325 or a 330, you have this problem where you're likely at this point consuming about 1 quart of oil per every 1,000 miles, which is what the consumption that I have. And the cause for that is the redesigned oil rings in the M54 engine. The M52 TU oil rings were fine. The M54 oil rings have excessive wear, which causes excessive oil consumption. And because this setup will increase the amount of vacuum inside the crankcase, that helps the oil rings to get sucked to the sides of the pistons better. And according to anecdotal evidence, an oil catch can setup like this will help you with that oil consumption problem. I don't know that for sure myself because I just installed the system. I'm still in the middle of testing it myself. I'm due for an oil change. I'm going to go ahead and do that, top up my oil level, note down the mileage, and then I'm going to put probably like 500 miles on that because that'll take me about a month. And I'll check my oil level, and if my dipstick, you know, is showing half instead of full, then I know nothing happened. Like this didn't improve anything. But if it's still at full or near to full, this did something. And I will post the results of that test in the description of this video. So check the description if you're coming upon this video like well after I've posted it. That is the end of this video. I hope you found it very useful. If you're not a subscriber yet, please consider subscribing. I'm the 50s Kid. Thanks a lot for watching.